I'm talking of what sometimes is known as half-dwarves. Now to many the mere notion of a union between dwarves and men is repugnant, but I don't see why it couldn't or shouldn't happen if both parties agree. Anyway, what seems to be what happened in the far north of Endor in the First Age, when a managed lady named Sinufel of the Forrodwaith, whom we call the Lossoth now, left her abusive husband, who was also of that people, and sought refuge among the stiff-bearded dwarves further to the east. She found both refuge and a new husband in Frostholm, it is said, and she was free to marry on account of her husband's head being split in two when he came looking for her. 'Tis said this soured relations between the Forrodwaith and the Stiffbeards for a bit, until the Stiffbeards gave the men more than 100 fine steel harpoons as weirgild by way of recompense. After that, Sinofel lived happily, returned to her kin, though she was with child by her stiff-beard husband in Frostholm, and he was in fact the one who had been doing the head-splitting. When she gave birth, it turned out to be a pair of healthy twins, a boy and a girl, whom she named Ukin and Ulafel. Ostracized by her Forrodwaith kin, she once again sought refuge among the Stiffbeards with her 2 children. The dwarves, however, feared taking her in, and that might spark another conflict with the Forrodwaith, and they remembered the expensive toll they had to pay the first time in the 100 harpoons, and as they were loath to do so again, they turned Silufel away and told her to go and plead for her life and the lives of her children with her own people. Being proud and also fearful to turn back to the people by whom she had been driven out, she turned instead northward, to the very extreme north of Middle-earth, where the continent used to meet the grinding ice of Helcaraxe, which connected it to the continent of Aman, the Undying Lands. Being stout of heart, almost like a dwarf, and her children also being very hardy, well nigh bordering on dwarfishness, Sinofel and her 2 children, Ukin and Ulafel, survived for some years in that desolate wasteland, until, when the bairns were about 10 years old, she was killed by the cold drake, Lumthunk. The children, being but a few years from suckling on their mother's teats, 'tis said, were both strong and sharp-witted, and they managed to heat up the dragon's lair with fire so much that the beast fled south to the Iron Mountains. These first 2 Umli took its lair for their home, and when they were full grown, which they say is halfway between a man and a dwarf, so I assume when they were around 30, they wandered back southward to visit their kin, both men and dwarfs. Now all had been forgiven, though to my mind there was nothing to forgive so far as the Umli were concerned, and the 2 youngsters were welcomed with open arms by both peoples. Ukin sought out and married a dwarf maiden, and Ulafel wed one of the men of the Forrodwaith. Their offspring did likewise intermarry with a stiff-beard and Forrodwaith, until there were suddenly sufficiently many Umli that they were so far removed they could marry among their own people. Since the time of Ukin and Ulafel, the Umli had often in the summer, when the weather was milder, travelled north to Lamthank's cave to see the place where they, or in the case of their descendants, their forebears, had spent their infancy. Once they had become a proper people, the Umli began to more and more occupy their own parts of Frostholm and other stiff-beard settlements and Forrodwaith encampments, until at last they decided they preferred to reside in and around the old domain of their progenitors. And so one day they all upped and left for the very far north, where they dwell to this day. Unlike the Stiffbeards, who, as I've said, like all dwarfs of Arda, build stable settlements, and also unlike the Lossoth and the forebears of the Lossoth, the Forrodwaith, who are and were always wholly nomadic, moving from place to place yearly, The Umli are semi-nomadic and sometimes stay in the same place for more than a year. Like the Stiffbeards and the Lossoth, they are hunter-gatherers and live from fishing, hunting the wild beasts of that land and picking herbs and berries in the summer. They live in clans, like all the dwarves of Arda. These clans, 14 in number, they call Lati, and these 14 Lati in turn are grouped together in 5 Lati. None of these lives in Lamthank's cave, but that place is kept by representatives of 4 of the 5 Lati, one for each season, seasonally. One of the Lati has been cast out of Umli society as long ago already as in the First Age. They turned to the Dark Lord Morgoth, and even with the passing of that power beyond the walls of night, they have not fully turned away from their evil ways. The Umli are a bit taller than full dwarfs in Middle-earth, and grow to an average height of 5 feet. They resemble us dwarfs more than they do their mannish forebears, and like us are stocky of build and almost as hardy. They have penetrating blue eyes, and their hair and beards are various shades of brown and red. The red must be from their forehead-white ancestors. They have the same type of noses as we do, which men actually describe as bulbous, but which I and most others of our kin would call stately, and which, by the by, is shared by the dwarfs of all the worlds and plains I've been to. Like us, they take pride in their beards, and they are wont to braid them and care for them and for their hair, as do the Stiffbeards. Unlike dwarfs, however, their women are never bearded, so I assume this is something they take after their mannish side. They make their clothes, tools, and weapons in much the same manner as the Stiffbeards. That is, their clothes more often than not from the leather they tan from the wild beasts of that frozen region, and their tools and weapons from bones as often as from silver, and from the steel they can make themselves from the iron that they have received by trade with the Iron Fists and others. They may not be as good smiths as other types of dwarf, but they beat most of the peoples of the Akazad, and speaking of which, in Arda, though they are half mannish, they still count among the Khazad to us and other dwarves. Well, I really thought the Umli were the best people to start with when talking about the half-dwarves of any world. What really got me thinking about them were the Derro of Oerth and those of Toril. The Derro of Toril were a monstrous crossbreed of... Sorry, I meant those of Oerth. They were a crossbreed of dwarves and men from that world, a magical union perpetrated in heinous ritual by the Sual Imperium of Oerth. As a race, they are stealthy, cruel, and utterly murderous, insane. They dwell in small tribes throughout the Underdark of that world. They have their own quarters in many dark elven and Duergar cities of that region, but they also have their own small strongholds, villages, and hamlets. The Derro average 4 feet in height, so the same as the hill dwarves of Oerth, but their coarse skin is white with bluish undertones, and it's pocked with wee tufts of uncouth hair. Most Derro men have moustaches, but very few are bearded, and none of their women have beards either. Their whiskers and beards, for those that have them, as well as the hair on their heads, is usually straight and tan or pale yellow. Their eyes have no pupils, I'm told, and I couldn't make out any of those on the Derro I saw. If you ever find yourself in the Underdark of Oerth, you'd better stay well clear of the Derro strongholds. They seek out prey from all other races, both Khazad and Akazad, to enslave and torment. In fact, the Derro are so far removed from most dwarves in spirit, though they do resemble us in body, that they are more akin to orcs and trolls. The Derro are tribal more than clannish. All members of a Derro tribe share the same tribal name. Original location in Oerth, where they were first seeded by their wicked masters. History, dialect, and culture. Their tribal names, which each individual carries, is the same as the name of the tribe, and is normally taken from the savant, leader of their tribe, or a tribal god. A savant is someone who knows about hidden things, like a medium or clairvoyant. Everything from where you may have forgotten your clawhammer, to where you've got a boil on your backside, to where there's a substantial vein of gold. These extraordinary individuals use this ability to acquire positions of leadership within their tribes, and so the tribal chieftains of the Derro are usually one of these savants. The Derro keep slaves, mostly men, dwarves, and orcs. These they treat with the utmost cruelty. They sometimes even interbreed with these slaves. 'Tis said that the child of a man and a Derro is always a Derro of either sex, whereas the offspring of a dwarf and a Derro is always male and sterile, but that they're always strong as steel. Luckily, if Derro even try to have it off with an orc, the union cannot produce any offspring as far as I know. 'Tis said that the Derro of Oerth revere their gods, the Rinka and the Inkarazan, above all others. The Inkarazan is not known to most Oerthlings of any race except for the Derro and the Mind Flayers. There are some minor demigods as well, deities perhaps comparable in strength to our less powerful Maiar, whose lordship is certain mountain tops and streams. Only the demigods of the Derro are deities of war, death, and destruction. Some of them pray to Beltar, a Suel goddess of malice, caves, and pits, mostly worshipped by men of Oerth. A few Derro have even turned to the worship of Orcus, who is a demon prince of the abyss, a breed and plane I would prefer to talk as little about as possible, as I've said before. I've actually been there once. Suffice to say that the demons are like our Balrogs of Morgoth, who, fortunately, all were slain in the War of Wrath when their master was toppled. The abyss, well, 'tis a place and yet not a place. 'Tis evil for sure, where those demons breed and multiply, seeking always to overthrow all good people in all the planes and all the worlds, though I'm glad to say they've never heard about Arda, and opening a portal between any layer of the abyss and Arda would luckily be well nigh impossible. Enough said about demons and the abyss.